So, I feel like this is pretty standard routine, but today what we're going to do is go over to what Elliotte Friedman said yesterday during the Hockey Night in Canada, or Hockey Day in Canada broadcast, and highlight all of the things that he had discussed in regards to the Vancouver Canucks. Now, I'm sure y'all are familiar with the formatting. They do insider stuff, they do segments on TV, but the entire segment of yesterday's Canucks-related news was posted onto the Sportsnet social media pages on Twitter, so I will leave a link in the description if you want to go ahead and watch this on your own time. It's a 40-second long clip, but you know what they say, right? A picture paints 1,000 words. And when it comes to all of these ideas, there are so many different conversations that we can have because of them. But today we are focusing on 3 main ideas that were highlighted by the Canucks Army Twitter account. They retweeted the Sportsnet video and they put it all in writing. So without further ado, this is what Friedman talked about during yesterday's Hockey Night in Canada segment. Firstly, the Vancouver Canucks and Patrik Allvin are closing in on an extension. Secondly, the Canucks are in the market for a top 6 forward. And thirdly, Friedman connects Vancouver to Jake Guentzel and ELIAS LINDHOLM. Now let's go in order as to how Friedman talked about this on the program, starting out with the news that Patrik Allvin and the Vancouver Canucks are closing in on an extension. Now this should not be seen as a surprise to anybody. Anyone who watched the press conference of Aquilini and Jim Rutherford from the other day after Rutherford got his extension will recognize that the Vancouver Canucks ownership has very big belief in what it is that this current management has been doing. We had already talked about this, but Jim Rutherford acting as the buffer between the management side of things and the ownership side of things, making sure there's a little bit more breathing room and not just the owner clutching at the GM's throat, demanding him to make a trade for Oliver Ekman-Larsson or whoever, forcing them to draft Jake Virtanen in 2014 instead of the guy they wanted to take in Dylan Larkin. The existence of a president who is able to step in between and also calm the fans once in a while too is very important. And I think a lot of y'all may remember this, but back when Rutherford and Allvin were initially hired, we had a lot of press conferences from Jim Rutherford when the Canucks were going through their rebuild, or not rebuild, but retool, and he would frequently step up and say what the Canucks were thinking, and it was really refreshing. Like, the Canucks needed a voice just to be able to calm the storm and make sure to the fans that, yeah, everything's going okay. And Rutherford was that guy. Best part about it is, he pretty much trained and mentored Patrik Allvin while they were in Pittsburgh together, so anything that Rutherford picked up in terms of being able to build a Stanley Cup championship team, Patrik Allvin has probably internalized. So the fact that they already extended Rutherford for 3 years, by the way, we already said this, but the guy's going to be 78 by the time his next contract expires. Talk about putting in your hours. Patrik Allvin, he's next up in line, maybe not till the end of his 70s like Jim Rutherford is, but still, Allvin sticking around. I like it. Let's move on to the other things that were talked about in this segment. Friedman also mentioned how the Vancouver Canucks are in the market for a top 6 forward. Now, that is not necessarily new. We did make a video just the other day talking about other names that have been tossed out there as potential Canucks targets. We discussed the idea of Toffoli, we discussed Casey Mittelstadt, and how Patrik Allvin should be all over these names. I still believe that. I still think that they would be pretty good additions. But just going over the idea of the Canucks acquiring a top 6 forward in general, this is honestly something that I think has been a long time coming, mostly because for this entire season, I hate to say it, but the second line for the Vancouver Canucks has just been nothing. And I say nothing as in like, oh, they haven't been good, they haven't necessarily been bad, they've just been nothing. Like, this Mikheyev, Suter, Kuzmenko line just cannot get any offense strung together. And even for a guy like Pius Suter, he was really effective when he was in the bottom 6, playing with extra guys like Höglander, and for a while, you had Connor Garland swapping around there. This Canucks cast of top forwards and bottom 6 guys is so good, and they have such a defined identity. That Lotto line is just fantastic. They move the puck around like nobody's business, even when you had just Miller and Besser together and whomever else would be included on that line. Phil DiGiuseppe was part of that trio for a little bit. You had other guys bouncing around there. Pettersson playing with Kuzmenko and Lafferty, just wasn't really the most effective player, I'm not gonna lie. Lafferty was fine, honestly, but Kuzmenko and Pettersson together just did not have the same magic that they had last season, and now putting Suter, Kuzmenko, and Mikheyev together, like, it just has not been good. Mikheyev, admittedly, like, he has the speed, he has the pace, he has the forechecking, and he can play PK, but anytime this guy gets a breakaway, which is not too rare, not gonna lie, like, he gets a breakaway maybe once every 2 games or so, but he's never able to finish. Like, what happened to this guy? His hands are made out of stone. Shades of Michael Grabner, in a way, honestly. So, if the Canucks are going after a top 6 forward, which we've been hearing from all reports that they are, it would make a lot of sense to try and replace somebody else in that top 6. Maybe swap out a Mikheyev for the new winger, have Kuzmenko play with Suter and this other guy, or if you wanted to put things back to where they were at the beginning, then have Pettersson with Kuzmenko and the new guy, and then Miller, Besser, and I guess Mikheyev. It's tough to put Mikheyev down in the third line because he's making like $4-point-something million a year. He just hasn't really been too much of a needle mover. Definitely not bad, but definitely not great either. So, Canucks going after a top 6 forward, not surprising. Now finally, let's go over to the last thing that Friedman talks about in regards to this segment. He goes over Jake Guentzel and ELIAS LINDHOLM. Guentzel of the Pittsburgh Penguins, Friedman says, is probably going to be a Canucks target because of the connections. We have talked about this a ton, but the fact that Guentzel is a former Pittsburgh Penguin, or he is a Pittsburgh Penguin, Allvin and Rutherford know what they're getting with this player, they're familiar with his game, and we had talked about this in all the videos in the past, but he is such a good player that if you wanted to find that final piece, like if you assume Kuzmenko isn't the guy anymore, or Mikheyev, you want to move him away, if you have a top 6 of, let's say, Pettersson, Kuzmenko, Mikheyev, just keep things the way they were, and then if you shoved Guentzel onto that Brock Besser, JT Miller line, that could be an all-American line of 3 guys that just know how to make things work offensively. It may be a rental, it may not be, who really knows? Allvin and Rutherford know how to negotiate with Guentzel and his agency specifically, so maybe there would be some sort of a connection that makes it easier, but of course, I'd say that Guentzel is maybe the best player that has been linked to the Vancouver Canucks in all of these trade discussions. When you talk about the production and the goal scoring and the playmaking, Guentzel can just do it all. And ever since he made his debut with the Penguins back when they were winning all those Stanley Cups, he has been a force. So the Vancouver Canucks going after him, not really all too surprising. I like to see it. The price would probably be a bit, like we'd been seeing some other trade rumors tossed out there. I know Sakaris and Price had themselves a segment where they discussed the idea of Kuzmenko and like Hoglander or something, or Kuzmenko and Podkolzin for Guentzel. And honestly, if that's the thing that gets it done, I consider it. Not gonna lie, like, how good Guentzel is as an upgrade on Andrei Kuzmenko, and how much that would help the Canucks in their postseason run, because they're gonna go and make the playoffs this season. I mean, they've got like a 99% chance of making the dance this year, according to Money Puck. They're probably, you know, knock on wood, probably not gonna start a really bad losing streak of 5, 6, 7 in a row, like they've done before. You know, let's do it one more time. Again, knock on wood, that doesn't happen. So, if you think that Kuzmenko is that bad, and you think Guentzel is that much of an upgrade, honestly, the price of one Podkolzin, I think about it. Even if it is a rental situation, you know, it's kind of tough, considering Andrei Kuzmenko also is in a pretty beefy dollar amount contract too. The other name that Friedman goes out there and mentions that could be available for Vancouver is ELIAS LINDHOLM, as we had talked about in another video. That was the Jim Rutherford signing video, but LINDHOLM has been a pretty intriguing player too. He's been on the decline since his 82-point year a few years ago, but he's still kind of okay, especially for playing on a Calgary Flames squad that has been pretty disappointing everywhere else, all things considered. And so when it comes to this entire thing here, Vancouver going after top 6 forwards, LINDHOLM and Guentzel being mentioned as 2 primary names. Of course, we had also talked about Toffoli and Casey Mittelstadt in yesterday's video. So my question to you is, based off of this report, based off of the idea that the Canucks are going after a top 6 guy, who do you think is the most suitable, and what do you think the price should be? Is it Guentzel that you like the most? He's probably the best name out of these 4. If you're talking to me personally, like, I would love to see Tyler Toffoli coming back, mostly because I think that's the best story. Like, of course, Guentzel's the best player. I think LINDHOLM would have maybe the best connection, you know, Swedish connection, plus the fact that he was in Calgary, so he's probably familiar a little bit with the Canucks. Then you've got the Toffoli story, of course, and then Mittelstadt. There's a nice little connection there with Pettersson as well, because of the prospect battles in 2017-18. But either way, out of these names, which one do you think is the best? Also, what are your thoughts on Patrik Allvin getting the extension? Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. Video for Friedman is going to be linked in the description. I hope you enjoyed this video. And bye.